One of the greatest skiers the sport has ever seen just survived a brutal Olympic crash, and now the entire sports world is telling her the same thing. It's time to walk away, but Lindsey Vonn isn't backing down, not after surgeries, not after a helicopter ride to the hospital, and not even after her own father publicly said her career is over. Instead, the 41-year-old legend just fired back with a message that's turning heads across the Olympic world. Who said I was retiring? And now the debate is exploding. Here's what just happened. During the women's downhill race at the 2026 Winter Olympics in Italy, Vonn suffered a devastating crash that left her with a serious leg injury. The fall was so severe she had to be airlifted from the mountain and rushed into surgery on her left leg. At 41 years old, this came just weeks after she had already ruptured her ACL during a practice run in Switzerland, meaning she entered the Olympics already battling a major injury. And if that wasn't dramatic enough, the retirement conversation exploded almost instantly. Fans, analysts, and even her own father started saying the same thing. Her career was finally over, but Vonn quickly shut that down on social media. When someone assumed she was retiring, her response was blunt. Who said I was retiring? To understand why this moment is so explosive, you have to understand who Lindsey Vonn is in the history of alpine skiing. She's not just a champion. She's one of the most decorated skiers the sport has ever seen. Vonn owns 84 World Cup victories, a number that once stood as the women's record for the sport. She's collected 20 World Cup Globe titles and 3 Olympic medals. Her dominance stretched across more than a decade. But injuries have always been part of the story. Multiple knee surgeries, ligament tears, rehabilitation. After rehabilitation, those injuries eventually forced her to retire back in 2019. Then came the shock comeback in 2024. Vonn returned to competitive skiing, and incredibly, she climbed right back to the top of the sport. At 41 years old, she even managed to reclaim the world #1 ranking, setting new records in the process. That's what makes this crash so emotional, because this wasn't just another injury. This felt like the moment the clock finally caught up. Even her father, kildow, publicly told reporters the Olympics would be the end. He said there would be no more ski races for his daughter. But Vonn clearly disagrees. This situation raises a massive question for elite athletes everywhere. When does greatness become too dangerous to continue? For Vonn, skiing has never been just a career. It's identity. And that's why the retirement conversation is so complicated. From a strategic standpoint, alpine skiing is one of the most physically brutal sports in the world. Downhill racers can exceed 80 miles per hour while navigating icy terrain and violent elevation changes. Reaction time matters, strength matters, recovery speed matters, and age absolutely matters. At 41, Vonn is competing against athletes nearly half her age. The margin for error becomes razor thin. Then there's the injury history. Multiple knee reconstructions already forced her into retirement once. Now she's dealing with another catastrophic leg injury that required surgery. From a medical perspective, returning again would be incredibly risky. But here's the other side of the equation. Elite champions operate differently. For athletes like Vonn, quitting on someone else's timeline isn't an option. Her social media response made that mindset crystal clear. She said she's focusing on recovery, and most importantly, she made it clear the decision belongs to her alone. That tells us something. This isn't just about competing again. This is about control over how a legendary career ends. For someone who spent a lifetime defying limits, the idea of finishing with a crash in a stretcher might feel unacceptable. The reaction across the sports world has been intense. Some fans are applauding her resilience. They see a legend refusing to let injuries dictate the final chapter, but others are worried. One fan bluntly told her online that she nearly lost her leg and should simply put her feet up. And when your own father publicly calls for retirement, it adds another emotional layer to the story. Sports analysts are split too. Some believe Vonn has already accomplished everything possible in alpine skiing. Others argue that champions like her deserve the right to decide when the story ends. Either way, the debate is getting louder. So what happens next? There are two very different scenarios. Best case scenario, Vonn fully recovers, her rehabilitation goes perfectly, and one day she returns for a final race, not necessarily to win another title, but to close her career on her own terms. One last run, one final moment, a farewell that feels worthy of one of skiing's greatest champions. Worst case scenario, the injuries simply prove too severe, recovery becomes harder than expected, and the risk of another catastrophic crash becomes impossible to justify. In that case, the Olympic fall may end up being the final moment of an incredible career. Not the ending anyone wanted, but sometimes sports write their own script. Now the question shifts to the fans. Should Lindsey Vonn keep chasing one more race, or is it finally time for one of the greatest skiers ever to step away? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this debate isn't going away anytime soon. And if you want more deep analysis on the biggest stories in American sports, make sure you subscribe to Sportswire USA.